Hi, everybody, and welcome to the Secret Sauce of Selling podcast, the ultimate guide and sales gym to unlocking the secrets of successful selling. I'm your host, James Abraham, and I'm on my mission to empower the best generation of sales professionals and business leaders the world has ever seen. And I'm super excited to be here with you today to share the insights, tactics, and strategies to help you take your sales performance and sales leadership game to the next level. This week, we've got Mark Foley from Sandler. How are you, Mark?
Oh, great, James. Happy to be here. Appreciate the opportunity to speak with you.
Well, welcome to the show, and I'm super excited. Mark is with Sandler Corporate Accounts, and Mark has probably seen everything when it comes to sales performance, and I'm super excited to have Mark on the show today. And Mark, our topic today is decision process, really relevant to today's economy, to today's environment. What are we talking about when it comes to decision process?
Yeah, it's a great question, and as we know, it's often fairly complicated, right? So typically the larger or more complex the opportunity, the more complex the decision process. So in my experience and what's going on in the macroeconomic environment, I feel like this particular step, of course, what Sandler teaches around the decision process is absolutely critical these days, and I think many sellers can benefit from really learning more and applying more of what we offer in terms of how to do an effective and complete decision step.
Absolutely. And so let's just take a step back and talk a little bit about why this is such an important topic. When I work with salespeople and sales leaders, a lot of times what I find is um, they either skip the conversation about decision or they really kind of just lightly touch on that for a variety of different reasons. Sometimes because they don't know how to do it. Sometimes because there are voices in their head telling them stop, because God forbid they'll hear something they don't want to hear. But let's take a step back and understand a little bit about the challenges that sellers have today when it comes to the decision process and really uncovering what's really happening. What are your thoughts when you meet sellers these days? What do you think their challenges are when it comes to this most important piece in the managing a good process?
Yeah, I mean, I think there's really a lot there. Now buyers, of course, have access to information like never before. And so they're trying to gather as much information even prior to engaging with a seller. And what I see every day, James, is that folks in sales enablement roles or other roles are being tasked to do research and to have the discovery conversations with potential partners like Sandler. Uh, and they're trying to do all of that work without really involving sales leaders on their side or the decision makers, key stakeholders, as well as an ultimate decision maker. So, as you well know, that's pretty contrary to what we teach and what we want sellers to do. So we're essentially starting out relatively at odds in that buyer seller dynamic, and so it's something we really need to address early and up front so that we don't find ourselves really challenged to get access to key stakeholders and decision makers when we need to.
So let's unpack that for a second, because when we talk about the decision step or uncovering how companies make decisions, usually there are a few elements that need to be taken under consideration. And I think my question to you is, when working with so many sellers, and you're in the training business and the sales business, and I think selling to salespeople is even tougher than anything. What do you feel are sellers are really holding back on it? What is it that they don't know, or that they know and don't do, or that they do but they don't have that level of conviction? I mean, what are the biggest challenges they have these days, especially in this environment, specifically when it comes to uncovering what's happening on the other side?
Yeah, I would say, again, thinking about when we talk about success triangle, right, and we think about skills that sellers need and behaviors that they need to apply, and then the key aspect of attitude or mindset. I think it's really a mindset issue more than it's anything else. That sellers, if they're talking to somebody who is leading, the buying initiative, but they know it's not really the person who's going to make the ultimate decision. They don't want to offend that person. They don't want to go around that person. They don't want to upset the apple cart, so to speak. And so they may be reluctant to have a good, transparent, and upfront conversation that says, obviously, James, at some point in this process, we're going to need to talk to others and get access to others. So, what's the best way that you and I can work together to make that happen? Asking questions like that often doesn't happen, and I think it's primarily due to the salesperson's comfort zone and their unwillingness to do it, rather than the fact that they don't have the skill to do it.
Yeah, I agree. I've had a couple of salespeople the past couple of weeks that have said to me, "Oh, I don't want to go around them, and I don't want to upset them." And yeah, that happens quite a bit. So, any listeners and viewers, guys, pay attention because this is really, I think this is relevant to all of us. And so, I want to talk about the buyers for a second. I want to talk about the prospects. From your point of view, and you've been doing this for many years, what do you feel that their challenges are when it comes to making decisions, buying decisions, change decisions? What does it look like from the other side?
Yeah, that's a really excellent question because, you know, as we know, we're talking about, transformation in many cases, and transformation for sellers or for a sales organization is not an easy thing, right? So I tell people right up front, like, hey, there's no magic dust that we can sprinkle on folks, right? Like we have to look at this as a process over time and making incremental progress over time. And I think that buyers really need help as it relates to specific skills, right? The how to, but at the same time, they need to be able to stretch that comfort zone and feel comfortable and confident that if if they only follow what the buyer wants to do, then the sellers are, seriously at risk for accomplishing what they want to accomplish.
Yeah, I agree. And we always talk about selling on a conversational level, giving them experience. And I think a lot of times that experience kind of hits a brick wall when it comes to the decision discussion, because a lot of sellers struggle to wrap their head around, how do I manage this conversation? How do I not, as you mentioned, upset them, but also make this conversational? One of the questions I love, and I advocate, is always to ask buyers, have you ever bought, no matter what you sell, have you ever bought anything like this before? I think that is a very important question because I think a lot of times sellers are just taking that for granted and are afraid of the answer. And I think either way, I mean, if they have bought it before, they have never bought it before, you want to know so that you can uncover what their concerns are, and when it comes to making decisions, how they typically go about that. But focusing on more complex deals these days when it comes to actually navigating in that enterprise, in the opportunity, having multiple stakeholders, influencers. What are your thoughts when it comes to selling more complex deals and having multiple stakeholders and multiple influencers and decision makers? If you could give the listeners and the viewers, a few tips on how they can actually have those discussions, what they should focus on, what's important, what isn't important, and where their energy should be going.
Yeah, and you touched upon it with your question. So I'm going to just start there quickly and then shift a little bit. But what I'll often ask is more of a presumptive question that might sound like, hey, James, the last time you implemented, a sales training program like this one, like what did that look like and how did that work for you? And then they're much more likely to say, well, we haven't done this before. And so my next follow-up question is typically, well, I appreciate you sharing that. Are you open to recommendations, based on our experience and what we do? Are you open to suggestions and recommendations and best practices, right? So that sets a nice stage for us to come across with the expertise that we have. The other thing that I think is critical, and our team talks about it, we deal with it on a regular basis, and that is, we know the power of Sandler's upfront contract. And when we do a good upfront contract and set clear expectations, again, you may be charged with doing research and discovery on a sales training program, and you and I might be talking, but when we have our first meeting, I need to make it clear that at some point, if things go well between you and I, and we agree on next steps, those next steps will need to include other influencers, other stakeholders, and at the appropriate stage, we absolutely will need access to the ultimate decision maker. Now, if you say that doesn't work from your perspective, and that's a possibility, that we're at that place where we have to decide, are we just going to follow your process as the buyer, or are we going to figure out a way to achieve what we want, but at the same time keeping you engaged and not upset with that process, right?
Yeah, absolutely. And you mentioned influencers. What I find today is that a lot of time, especially I mean in B two B, even in B two C, you'll have an influencer, and an influencer does not make the decision. An influencer sometimes is not a stakeholder, will not even touch the solution, but does influence the decision. And I think a lot of times what's happening with sellers is that they're overlooking these people, these influencers. They're not even asking about them. And these influencers could be consultants, they could be channels, partners, they could be a spouse. It could be just so many different hidden influencers in the shadows there that a lot of times we overlook them. And sometimes we're in the business of sales performance. One of the things that really makes me feel uncomfortable is just seeing salespeople not understand why they lost the deal. Well, you don't lose anything you don't have, but why it was a no, or why they're being ghosted. And a lot of times because they're not really qualifying strong enough. So I want to talk about qualification for a second. What are your key suggestions when it comes to qualifying on decision? And what should sellers these days really focus on? What should be their northern star? And what should be stuff that they need to really look to keep themselves safe from?
Yeah, thanks for asking. A few things come to mind. I think when we start the process again, and we know we're not dealing with all of the stakeholders or decision makers yet, right? We have to understand what is a win for the person that we're talking to. So, how do we help them? How do we certainly make them look good or understand? Like, will they be involved in the process all the way through? Will they be someone who's a project manager? Should we work together? But what does a win look like for them? And of course, understanding that for along the way for everybody that we work with. And I think again, just to understand what the decision process will look like. Will there be key criteria that they're using? Some folks will have a checklist, or they'll have a form that all of the stakeholders use in the process of discovery. So what might those selection criteria look like? And so that we can't hit a target that we can't see, right? So again, we want disclosure and transparency to say, again, it's okay at some point if you don't think that we're the right fit for what you're trying to do. But the best way for us to figure that out together is to, understand exactly what you're trying to do. And so that transparency and permission for them to tell us, we're not a fit, generally relieves some of the pressure and hopefully takes the guard down. And then the last point I would mention is it's all about collaboration. So even if you've asked for me at some point to walk you through some of our solution or how we deliver a global program or whatever those questions might be, and I can show you some things, but it's with the understanding, James, that let's collaborate on this. You may see some things that you really like. You may see some things that you don't think are a fit, and that's perfectly fine. But if we collaborate together, we're going to get that solution right. It's not just about me thinking what's the right solution. Let's work together and make sure we have the right solution.
Yeah, that goes to it takes a decision maker to get other people to make decisions. So we got to make a decision as sellers to ask those questions and to be ready and able, willing and able to get a no for the right reasons, so that we can get a decision. And I think one of the trends I'm seeing today is that a lot of people are terrified of making a decision, especially in this rapidly changing world, where what was relevant 3 weeks ago is no longer relevant in technology, and the economy is changing, and so on. And so that I think that just making the decision and saying a yes or a no, a here or there, is something that buyers have always struggled with. But these days, because there are so many moving parts, because there's that we're in a changing environment, rapidly changing environment, they're struggling to make those decisions, and sellers need to guide them. need to help them. They need to relieve the pressure. But when it comes to the seller itself, from your point of view, what does the seller need to have in him to be a good decision maker, to drive others to make decisions?
Yeah, it's I'm sure it's several things. Again, there you need to have the appropriate mindset, right? And the confidence that goes with it. And you and I know, and certainly something you're teaching to your clients is like the cure. Pretty much the cure to all sales problems, right? Is a very robust pipeline. So that if
Yeah.
this particular prospect wants to say no, it's okay because we have lots of other opportunities to work on. When our pipeline is thin and we get emotionally involved and we say, "Hey, I really need this one," then we're more inclined to again follow along what a prospect or buyer wants us to do rather than hold fast to our system. So I think the confidence is key, and we know that a full pipeline certainly gives us lots of confidence and takes a lot of pressure off any one particular deal. So those are a couple things that really come to mind for me.
Yeah. Full funnel freedom.
Yeah.
Absolutely. Absolutely. I agree. So Mark, I know you're a Harley Davidson guy, and so tell me a little bit about your biking, about you being, being a rider, and how that actually supports your salesmanship and being a pro in this industry.
Yeah, it's I think all things tie together, right? So we all have personal goals and we all have things that we like to do and so I've been on a motorcycle since the age of 15 and so it's I don't need to divulge my age, but it's been decades of riding, right? And living in the Boston area, I spend most of that time riding in northern New England, where it's much less populated, and of course, great scenic views and riding. But I think you know having control of the machine, having the freedom that goes with it. Of course, knowing that the better I do at my work, the more I can actually ride and enjoy the things outside of work. So life is a balance, James, as you well know, right? We shouldn't be 100% focused on work, and we shouldn't be 100% focused on leisure activities either, right? Like we have to think about the time with family, the time with friends, the time working and developing ourselves, and the time to relax and enjoy ourselves. So I've always tried to maintain some level of balance, which we all know can be challenging.
That's awesome. I love it. Mark, what is your secret sauce for selling?
I know it might sound self-serving, but obviously being a Sandler employee and a devoted Sandler practitioner, I think that having the process in the first place to follow, right, having a system by which you sell, and understanding for each step or stage in our process, there's certain things we need to accomplish. There's exit criteria that we should be able to check off and say, yes, this is happening in a way that it makes sense to move forward. And I think I was asked this in a team meeting no more than 2 weeks ago. Like, what's the biggest lesson that I've learned? And that is like the power of closing the file, right? When it makes sense. Like it's so essential to disqualify an opportunity, when it makes sense to do so. And I think a lot of sellers always believe like, hey, my product's great. I know the prospect can use my product. I'm going to hang in there. Like I think I can get them to yes. And we know the deals drag out for months on end and ultimately do not close. And so a lot of wasted time and energy. So if you feel like you're in a place where it's not going to move forward, you give the prospect very respectfully the opportunity to tell you that it's time to close the file. And you and I know that if they don't want to close the file, maybe they've been busy, maybe they had a crisis or something come up and they've gone dark for a little while. But when they come back and say, no, we're still interested or we don't want to close the file, then we're happy to stay engaged. But for me, that's a great ingredient in the secret sauce, if not the secret sauce.
I love it. Yeah. Pipeline hygiene.
Yeah. Yeah.
Yep.
Major pain.
Absolutely.
Yeah.
Yep. I'd rather have an empty funnel than a funnel full of fluff.
Yeah. Yeah.
Yep. And because the empty funnel will make you go out and bring some new stuff in. Absolutely. I love it. Um, Mark, is there anything you're listening to, watching? I mean, we have guests that share plays and movies and miniseries, anything you're watching or listening to, podcasts, books, you name it, recently that you believe it's given you a lot of knowledge and have profound impact on you that you'd like to share with the listeners.
Yeah, I mean, what comes to mind? So I'm a daily, affirmation and journaling guy like yourself. I'm a big scripture person as a Christian, so that's a big part of what I read on a daily basis and have accountability with friends. But as you know, the most recent Sandler Summit that we conduct with our clients in March every year, we had Dr. Benjamin Hardy present, and his book is one that I'm really enjoying right now. Talking about your future self, what you want that future self to look like, and how do you begin to bring that future self into the present. And it's really interesting stuff because it speaks to a different view on psychology, where historically psychology always wanted to examine our past. And this is focused on examining our future and where we want to go. And I think that's a much more positive and productive influence than looking back on the past.
I love it. Yeah, I actually quoted that book today, and I'm also an affirmation guy, and it's always bring it's the law of attraction. I think a lot of people are they want success, they want to make their dreams come true. A lot of them sit and wait for some special day to come along where everything will fall into place and suddenly everything will be great. And then there are some that realize that it's what we do constantly and consistently that build that road to success, and bringing that your future vision of what you want what does success look like, and bring it to the present. That's what makes people successful. So I appreciate you mentioning that. That's awesome.
Yeah, yeah, it's good stuff, and we're fortunate because in our organization we're surrounded by so many that believe in growth and development for themselves personally as well as those that they work with, and there are a lot of great resources. But like every journey begins with the single step, right? So we just have to start the process, and whether it's a book or a podcast or uh, you know video or whatever it may be. It's just starting that habit and then, using that to develop the outcomes we're looking for.
Yeah, there's a book I think I mentioned a few times on this podcast. Joe Dispenza, "Breaking the Habit of Being Yourself," and he talks a lot about shedding off those habits that keep us where we are and start to change the way we do things to become who we want to be. And so relevant, so relevant. Mark, this has been awesome. Thank you so much. I appreciate you and your knowledge and your insight. And for the listeners out there and viewers, thank you for tuning in. Subscribe, click the subscribe button. And remember this, whatever you're going to do, make sure you're doing it for the right reasons. Follow your process. No guts, no gain. I'll see you next time, and good selling.
Thank you, James.